All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Thank you for being here. Take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat, your name, pronouns, and where you're joining us from this evening. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome, folks. We're going to go ahead and get the night underway. My name is Rob Thomas, Executive Director of the Racial Justice Coalition of Asheville, North Carolina, born and raised here in Asheville, North Carolina, and currently doing work pertaining to reparations and many other things. And let's see, tonight my colleagues and I are excited to share our new campaign, which we're calling Reparations Are Due. I'm going to start by offering a little context. In 2020, both the city of Asheville and Buncombe County apologized to Black community members for hundreds of years of harm they had inflicted or in which they'd been complicit. Ever since that happened, many people have wondered whether reparations in this region was going to be something real or something performative. Would our local Black community be engaged in the process of deciding what reparations should look like? Would there be real change? These are serious questions. The Community Reparations Commission was formed and tasked with laying out recommendations for reparations. We knew that the odds were stacked against their success. That's why the RJC went all in on Every Black Voice, our campaign to ensure that the commission gets meaningful input from local Black community members to help guide their essential work. Now, to ensure that every Black voice in Asheville and Buncombe County gets heard, we're launching the Reparations Are Due campaign. Before we get into the details of that, we want to share this video that our teammate Sparrow made, pulling from some of the interviews we've done in collecting every Black voice. And I'll hand it over to you, Sparrow.
Actually, Rob, I'm not. I think I'm just going to tee up the video. So.
Oh, sorry about that.
Reparations for Asheville, a storytelling video including local residents, creative healers, and community leaders.
Reparations are a debt that is owed to the Black community, and when I think about the magnitude of what was taken, it's extremely frustrating, and it's honestly gross how many resources have been just robbed.
Yeah, I mean, it's very real. And first, just, say that the Southside neighborhood was a thriving Black economic center, a center of Black home ownership that was very much intentionally destroyed by the city of Asheville in the 1960s and 70s. People's homes were taken through eminent domain for as low as $600. And that's a very real part of the community still, that wasn't that long ago. Yeah. And there's still members of the neighborhood and members of the community, especially Black folks, who remember that, who have told me, my grandparents' house was right down the street and now it's gone. There were houses there and now there's nothing. It's just a grassy lot, It's not even that it has been replaced with something that really supports Black people in the Black neighborhood.
I, along with many others, were blindsided. This is Biltmore Avenue, and you come off of Biltmore Avenue onto Eagle Street. And on Eagle Street itself, it was the hub for all African Americans. They had restaurants, barbershops, flower shop, clothing store, pool halls, 2 funeral homes. But this was the Mecca. There were 3 doctors that had offices there. There was an insurance agency and a pharmacy. So it was amazing how much was on that one street. Now it's all gone completely. There was justification for getting rid of the substandard dwellings that people were living in. Plumbing was an issue, electricity was an issue. Many of those homes for years had depended on their fuel from the railroad, because at that time all of the engines on the railroad were steam engines. They burned coal, and the people would take sacks and go down on the railroad and pick up lumps of coal just to feed, cook food and to feed their heat their families. So there was justification for getting rid of those and making them more modern. The tragedy was the fact that they did not get fairly compensated. They were in some cases forced to give up their homes even when they did not want to leave because of eminent domain. It became an uphill battle because there's no lack of, there was no organization in terms of trying to combat the disparities, and it was frustrating because it was almost like the government rules, there's nothing you can do. That was sort of the general concept at that time.
Black people have been systemically excluded from historic and present private economic development and community investments, and therefore, Black-owned businesses have not received the benefit of these investments. These local movements, they help create the political capital needed at a federal level. If you look at anything that was ever passed, whether it was segregation, whether it was marijuana, whether it was whatever it was always local movements that created the momentum, and then finally the feds give in. And if you look at the statistics, 10 years ago, it was less than 10% support of the word reparations in America. From the latest polls that I've seen, it's like at 32 or 33%. And I expect those numbers to keep increasing so that we can get what I would view as real reparations.
I think the most frustrating part about reparations is knowing the amount of money that needs to go to the Black community and go into the Black communities, and feeling like it's gonna take a lot to get government and organizations to fully be on board with that.
If we're going to do reparations here, and if people really are interested in reparations, what does that mean? It means that we have to really address the systemic harms, the legislation, the history behind it, and then how do we move forward, and how do we hold those perpetuating that harm accountable, and how do we put policies and procedures and things in place to stop the harms. So that's really all of what we're talking about when we're reparations. Now, again, the big debate is, we know that people are wondering, well, are people going to actually get monetary compensation? Because most original conversations around reparations have been that. You all probably are aware, being in Buncombe County, that in 2020, the city of Asheville issued a formal apology and said that they would be supportive and provide funding for reparation initiatives. Did that mean actually compensating individuals? No. But we are hopeful that all of us working together will then be able to concentrate on what we can do, what programs and initiatives health and wellness can support. And when we, I love the fact that we opened with the altar. Tiffany and I were just talking about the fact that how do we look at providing health to all Black and brown bodies? How do we support and reclaim and reinvent Black healing spaces? What happened to Black midwives? What happened to Black hospitals? There were Black hospitals or Black healing spaces in Buncombe County. Why don't those exist anymore? And what can we do to support those initiatives being reestablished?
I'm working with some elementary schoolers, many of whom are Black and brown, and I just already see it play out, whether they can name it as such, but just like feelings of inferiority for whatever reason. Maybe they aren't good at math or good at this, and that gets collapsed with, because I'm Black, I can't do this. And when they have white kids who are succeeding in an area that they're not, there's this like automatic comparison that happens. And so just like teasing those things apart. You're Black and you're beautiful and you're smart and you're strong and you're soft and you're all of the things you want to be.
I'm a masterpiece.
Masterpiece.
And I'm changing my world by changing me.
I'm changing my world by changing me.
We go to my grandparents' house, and I think that's where I really realized that Black was so beautiful, is just always feeling, and the welcoming that happened with my mom. Like, my mother is a white female, and she was brought, like, when we got there, it really didn't matter. Like, it was truly just all out the window. It was about gathering around food and music and nothing else. And yeah, I think, going to visit, those visits with my family are what really kind of kept me knowing that Black is good.
Won't reparations divide us? Not any more than we are already divided. The wealth gap merely puts a number on something we feel but cannot say. That American prosperity was ill-gotten and selective in its distribution. What is needed is an airing of family secrets, a settling with old ghosts. What is needed is a healing of the American psyche and the banishment of white guilt. What I'm talking about is more than recompense for past injustices, more than a handout, a payoff, hush money, or a reluctant bribe. What I'm talking about is a national reckoning that would lead to spiritual renewal. Ta-Nehisi Coates. We were 8 years in power in American tragedy. And so, the reparations movement continues.
All right, so next we'll get into our PowerPoint presentation, Reparations Are Due. So today we're going to speak to you about the Reparations Are Due campaign, which we're officially launching tonight. To get things rolling, I'll pass it to my colleague, Mr. Derek Lewis.
Greetings, everyone. This is Derek Lewis. Work for RJC as a consultant for IT and business. So we'll start by reviewing how we got to this movement, this moment, with a review of both reparations resolutions that passed in Asheville and Buncombe County in 2020, and the history that prompted them. And next, we'll talk about where we are right now, the current state of our local reparations process. And finally, we'll talk about what needs to happen to make reparations real. So, how did we get there? Let's start with reparations resolutions. In the summer of 2020, both the city of Asheville and Buncombe County passed resolutions calling for reparations in this region. It made a lot of news. But what did these resolutions actually commit to? Both resolutions committed to making amends for the city and county's participation in sanctioning of the enslavement of Black people. Both resolutions also committed to make amends for their enforcement of segregation and its accompanying discriminatory practices. Both resolutions committed to make amends for their participation in urban renewal programs that harmed multiple successful Black communities. So let's review our local history in a little more depth to better understand why reparations are due. For what? Now I'm going to pass the mic to Aitunda.
Hello. My name is Ayotunde Dixon. I'm a canvasser for RJC and an event organizer. Asheville has a very deep and very compelling history. Many people think that slavery was not the big deal in this region because there were no plantations. But the truth is that slavery was fundamental to the accumulation of wealth in this region. The Buckham Turnpike was completed in 1828, was largely built by enslaved human beings. Once it was open, it made these regions a thoroughfare for ranchers who needed to move their livestock into various parts of the Southeast. There are parts of this history that a lot of people don't talk about because there was no farming in this area. Selling slaves to southern states was a very big part of the enslavement of the people in this area. This region required a large number of laborers to sustain the plantations growing in sizes in the South. Thousands of slaves were brought over from the Caribbean islands. They were brought here to the mountains in the Carolinas, where Southern slave owners would come up to the North Carolina, South Carolina area and purchase slaves to take back to their plantations. By the 1600s, obtaining indentured servants became more difficult because at first they started with indentured servants. That became more difficult because when I think white people realized that, oh, we getting ready to go over here to this new land, and after we work so long, we'll get land and we'll get freedom. Well, apparently some people went back and said, that's not so. So when it came time for them to get people to sign up to be indentured servants to come over here, that changed. And so by the 1600s, they realized that they needed, the landowners realized they needed more bodies to work the land and to work in the sugarcane fields in the Caribbean islands. And that's when they really started importing Africans from Africa. And they also made sure that they got Africans from certain regions. They were looking for ones that had the knowledge of planting and raising cattle and farming. So they didn't just, it was a very calculated way that they collected slaves and brought them to the Americas. Asheville and this area, and even though the slaves in this area did help build the railroads, but they also At the time, the slaves were considered chattel. So you have to put all of those things into context. And the chattel wasn't just the cows, it were the people too. After emancipation, the Great Migration happened. Sadly, when Lincoln died, the dream for newly freed slaves died, because no sooner had than he died shortly after the vice president at the time, who became the president, took away all the things that were given to slaves as part of the Emancipation Proclamation. It is estimated that the United States alone benefited from a total of 222,505,049 hours of forced labor between 1619 and 1865. And the moderate rate of interest that is worth $97 trillion today, just in the United States. The loss of property for the Europeans, they paid the people that owned slaves in Europe $20 million. I mean, $20 million in 1834. And in today's market, that would be $300 billion today. And so when we look at the history of slavery in this area, it was very hard, because after the Emancipation Proclamation and after Lincoln got killed and they took back all the people's rights, and the federal government pulled back all the troops that were protecting people from groups of people that wanted to just, take what little did the slaves have and get their land. It left open season. It left them completely defenseless. And that's when the Great Migration happened, and people started moving to the Midwest and out West to get away from the atrocities that were happening to them in the South. Black people have experienced disproportionately unemployment rates and reduced opportunities to fully participate in the local job market. Black people have been consistently and widely impoverished by discriminatory wages paid in every sector of the local economy, regardless of credentials and experience. Black people have been systemically excluded from historic and present private economic development and community investments, and therefore Black-owned businesses have not received the benefit of these investments. When it came to education access, it was the same story from the city's resolutions. Black people have been segregated from mainstream education within present-day school programs that include AG, AP, and honors. Black students have experienced the denial of education through admissions, retention, and graduation rates of every level of education in Western North Carolina, and through discriminatory discipline practices. Sadly, when there were all Black schools across the country, and especially here, Black students excelled. The graduation rate was at least 75 to 80%. Black children also went on to go to college, and there were trades in the schools which gave them job training so that they could excel in life. When integration happened, and everybody thought that integration was a great thing, but it was not the greatest thing in the world for Black students at that time, because our system was so racist. That's when grades, everything changed. Black teachers that had jobs for years, when they integrated, of course, they were going to be the first ones to lose their jobs. AP classes and HG classes and honor students, they weren't given the opportunity to excel, because it was, when you're going to you're in a system that you are not the majority, and that really doesn't want to see you as being a full human being. Of course, there are always going to be lots and lots of things that are happening to you as far as dropouts because of the pressures of the racism that were being experienced and the way they were treated in classrooms. And even if you were an excellent student, depending on who the teacher was and what their biases were, you still couldn't get ahead. There was also widespread harm in the realm of healthcare from the city's resolutions. Black people historically and presently receive inadequate, if not detrimental healthcare, exemplified by disproportionate morbidity rates and mortality rates that result from the generational trauma of systemic racism. Discriminatory treatment by medical professionals and discriminatory medical practices such as involuntary sterilization, denial of adequate testing, and denial of preventative and curative procedures. That's a whole nother book of terrible things that happen to Black people, because one of the main things that first happened with Planned Parenthood, even though eventually it wound up being something better than it was. Originally, Planned Parenthood was a way to sterilize people of color to make sure that they could not have other children. And those things they never really changed. They never really changed, except for the fact that people got more educated about what were going on with their bodies. Black women started really paying attention to, some of them did, about how they were getting treated. And still, because everybody has the respect and the fear of the white jacket, I found that to be true amongst Black and white people. There's something about the word doctor that makes people automatically think that, oh my God, it's the doctor, so whatever he says is right, not considering the fact that you've lived in your body all your life and you know your body pretty much better than anybody else does. Housing was another area of harm for the resolution. Black people have been denied housing through racist practices in the private realty market, including redlining, steering, blockbusting, denial of mortgages, gentrification. Black people have been denied housing, displaced, inadequately housed by government housing policies that include discriminatory VA, VHA practices, it's called urban renewal, but as Black people know, it's called urban removal, and a variety of local and federal affordable housing programs. The map highlights the redlining practice. Redlining refers to a practice that started in the 30s when the Federal Housing Act made it much more possible to get a loan to buy or improve a home. The Homeowners Loan Corp was asked by the federal government with classifying neighborhoods in terms of how risky they would be for lenders. Safety was green, blue or yellow, in that order. Red was unsafe, and red was synonymous with Black. This meant that Black folks couldn't get loans to buy houses, couldn't get loans to improve their homes. Sadly, that also has to do with the fact that veterans coming home from the Korean War and World War II, that's when they started building suburbs. And the federal government had it written into their contracts for them to get the loans to build the houses in the beginning, that they were not allowed to sell the houses to the Black soldiers coming home from these wars. And that did not change until almost the 70s, the mid to late 70s. Before that, there were a lot of Black military people that had to fight the VA for rights that they should have gotten when they got out of the military that they did not receive. I mean, what happened to them was an atrocity in the fact that Black soldiers came home not with honorable discharges, not with honorable discharges from the military, which they should have had, but on their paperwork, it said general discharge under honorable circumstances. That completely changes the way you receive benefits in the military. And so 9 chances out of 10, I mean, you could have been one of the best soldiers, saved thousands of lives, made sure that the people that you were fighting by made it back. And you came home with a general discharge under honorable circumstances when your white counterparts came home with honorable discharges and were said to be heroes. And Black soldiers were coming home and being disrespected in their uniforms. And there have been many, many cases where Black soldiers came home and wound up getting killed by law enforcement and by people in their communities with their uniforms on. And sadly, until this day, there are areas here in Asheville that still in their bylaws for their communities, it's still written that they don't sell their homes to Black people. One of those neighborhoods, for instance, is Biltmore. It's still in their charter that they cannot sell their home to a Black person. A lot of times they don't pay attention to those, but for this to be 2023, and that's still to be written into their charter, is the system. I mean, it's like, it's horrible. What are we supposed to do with that? That's another denial of your human rights. No matter how much money you make or what you can afford to buy, certain neighborhoods, you're still not allowed to buy homes in those areas. The Homeowners Loan Corp was tasked by the federal government with classifying neighborhoods in terms of how risky they would be for lenders. And this meant that Black folks couldn't get loans to buy homes, couldn't get loans to improve their homes. In spite of these racist practices, Black neighborhoods grew and preserved in Asheville. In places like the East End community included the Eagle Market Business District, was originally where the Patton family housed the people they enslaved. It became a thriving Black community. Each of the red dots you see on this screen were Black-owned businesses. Here are the Stumptown and Hill Street neighborhoods. Once again, note all the Black-owned businesses in red. This is Burton Street, which shows a similar pattern. Here is Southside. These communities were devastated by the urban renewal process as acknowledged in these resolutions. Both Buncombe County and the city of Asheville played a significant role in the destruction of our neighborhoods and businesses and the wealth that the community had started to build. This process moved many members of our community into public housing with no ownership, creating the conditions for multi-generational poverty and related issues. The racism that infused the segregation process laid the foundation for deeper racial disparities. In part of the roots of why Asheville City Schools, which is responsible, is still unable to provide Black students the education they deserve. To add insult to injury, the city holds buildings that were once successful Black schools and is responsible for the devastating destruction of Stevens Lee High, the castle on the hill. Since urban removal, the city has significantly built its tax base, allowing real estate speculators and developers to profit on property taken from Black residents with minimal compensation. It has benefited financially from the unchecked growth of tourism and the spread of gentrification, both which have further marginalized our community. And I will pass it to Rob to take it from here.
All right. As we move into the present day, we turn to the essential work of the Community Reparations Commission Chairman, Dr. Dwight Mullen, who has been highlighting the state of Black Asheville for decades now. We all know the racial disparities in our region are large and persistent, such as that of the median household income. We also know there's a huge gap in business ownership. There's also a huge gap in home ownership. And of course, there are huge gaps in education. As the property values in the city have steadily escalated, the white population has increased and the Black population has steadily decreased. The latest census numbers for Asheville show that the city grew by over 11,000 or 13.4% over the last decade. But the number of Black residents moved in the opposite direction, declining by almost 11% in the same time period. So, returning now to the 2020 reparations resolutions, how do they propose to make amends for all of this accumulated harm? Both Asheville and Buncombe County committed to create a joint commission that would make recommendations for how to address all of the harm they had caused or supported in the Black community. And that brings us to our local reparations process. A year after resolutions passed in 2020, the city ran a three-part speaker series. City also allocated $2.1 million to reparations and hired the company Tequity to oversee the process. Last year, the Community Reparations Commission was formed and Buncombe County allocated $2 million for reparations. Both the city and county agreed to continue funding reparations in future budgets. The Community Reparations Commission has 25 members. The chair is Dr. Dwight Mullen and the vice chair is Mr. Warner Little. The commission is made up of 15 neighborhood representatives and 10 other community members who were selected by city council and the county commission. The commission began meeting last April and meets every month, usually on the third Monday of the month. There are 5 impact area focus groups that are also meeting at least once a month, looking to identify recommendations in these 5 issue areas: criminal justice, economic development, education, health and wellness, and housing. The commission is currently drafting recommendations which could be presented as early as the next few months. So what does this all mean in terms of the political state of play? For that, I'll pass the mic over to David.
Thanks, Rob. Good evening, everybody. I'm David Greenson. I'm the Government Accountability Organizer here at the RJC. So to get a proper context, we need to jump back again to 2020 and review why reparations are even on the table in the first place. So after the murder of George Floyd, there were uprisings all over the country, including here in Asheville. Most of these initial local protests were predominantly white here in our city, just like the population is. So Black organizers began to meet at that time to discuss how they wanted to relate to the protest. Did they want to participate? Did they want to join? Did they want to lead? That led to the formation of Black Asheville Demands, which led in turn to the largest protest in the history of Asheville on June 6th. This protest centered Black community members with massive numbers of white people showing up in support. Now, the city council met 2 days later, and in addition to the presence on the streets, they'd also received an unprecedented level of emails and voicemails calling for justice. And that was evidenced a couple days later when they put their budget process on hold and began looking at how they needed to respond to the calls they were receiving to get serious on racial justice. And that, of course, led to all the headlines that we talked about earlier, right? 2 months later, a commitment to reparations passes, both city and county. It was led on the inside by Councilmember Keith Young, on the outside by Black organizers like our own Rob Thomas. who organized thousands of people to reach out to City Council and the County Commission. It was a pivotal moment, but we're here tonight because we're not in the same moment anymore. It's 3 years later, and we're having this conversation tonight because we need to figure out how we bring reparations to a successful next step. This graphic captures what I'm talking about. So you can see the huge surge of energy following George Floyd's murder that led to the passage of those historic resolutions. And now 3 years later, the energy is not quite the same. We have to wonder what's going to happen when the Community Reparations Commission presents their recommendations. Will we see an outpouring of support? We don't know exactly when the reparations recommendations are going to be finalized and presented. We don't know how much time we'll have at that point to begin building support for their passage. So it's important right now it's important first to note that all our elected officials, members of the City Council, Buncombe County Commission, they've all said repeatedly that they plan to support the work of the Community Reparations Commission. And that's important. But we all know, living in this country, how the winds of politics can blow in new directions. There's very likely to be loud voices in our community speaking out against the Reparation Commission's recommendations. And our elected officials are going to need to, they're going to need some showing from us to embolden them to stand strong. So the question is, what can we do now to ensure that they do stay accountable and that the recommendations do get passed? And that brings us to what comes next. What do we need to do right now? Well, we have a simple theory at this point. We think that there are two keys to passing the forthcoming reparations recommendations. And the first is to continue the work that we're doing already, which is to engage the Black community members in the reparations process. This is the ongoing work of Every Black Voice. It's continuing. It's continuing to build momentum. We're going to continue talking to folks every single day, finding out what reparations means to them, and passing that feedback on to the Community Reparations Commission. We're going to continue sharing the draft recommendations in community and encouraging folks to make input and get involved. But the second key, which is our main topic tonight, finally, is that it's going to be important to show that reparations isn't just something that the Black community supports. We need to show that there is a broad multiracial support for reparations in our region. We're going to do that by starting a pledge campaign, and I'll pass it back to Rob to tell you more.
All right. I'd like to introduce the Reparations Are Due pledge. The first step in our new campaign. Here's the series of statements we are asking all of you to endorse and to encourage everyone to everyone to support. So the first one is, I know that reparations are due to all Black people in the United States through federal, state, and local action. The second one is, I stand with the Community Reparations Commission and have faith in their leadership and vision for our local reparations process. And third, I will encourage my local elected representatives to take action once the recommendations of the Community Reparations Commission are finalized. And, we're doing this to support our local reparations process, because at the end of the day, a commission can only make recommendations. So they're going to need backup. What's the goal of the pledge? So our goal is to reach 5,000 pledges by July 1st, and then to nearly double that by August 1st. More broadly, our goal is to use the pledge as a conversation starter to get people talking about racial justice and reparations. We want to start those conversations and start lining up support now as we wait for the Reparations Commission to complete its work, so that we have folks lined up and ready when the recommendations are ready. In the long term, we're looking to build a wave of support to carry reparations recommendations to shore. 8,000 people is around 3.5% of the total population of Buncombe County, and political scientists have determined that this is a magic number. If you can activate 3.5% of a population for social change, you up your odds considerably for winning that change. So this is how we bend this curve back toward justice and secure real reparations. We get thousands of pledge signatures and then mobilize those people later to speak out in favor of the recommendations. The Community Reparations Commission and our local elected officials get the backing they need to bring the process to a successful conclusion. So here's what we're asking you to do. First, sign the pledge yourself. Second, share it with people you know. but we're asking you not to just pass it along casually. We're asking you to use the pledge as a conversation starter. We're asking you to talk to people about reparations. The Reparations Are Due page on our website is live now with the pledge at the bottom and a whole bunch of information below. We'll be putting together toolkits in the next weeks that will help you have constructive conversations with your friends and family and with whatever other groups you are a part of. We have time for a few questions. Click on raise hand or let us know in the chat that you have a question. All right, this might be the easiest campaign to start ever. No questions.
I'm seeing a question about a copy of the PowerPoint to aid conversations. Yeah, well, there's a thank you, Jim. The website has a lot of the same information in it. We're also going to be putting most of tonight's presentation in a video format, including Sparrow's video that we saw earlier. So it's all there, kind of a one-stop shop at the Reparations Are Due page. So if you go to our website, the link is just right on the at the front there to get to the Reparations Are Due page. So you can see what we got there. We're going to keep adding stuff to it, as we said earlier, to give you some further support in having these conversations. We just really want this to be front of mind again for people in this region. We know all of you are here tonight because you have remained proximate to this process, but we also know that there's a lot of people who aren't on this call tonight who aren't necessarily paying attention, and that's the conversations we want to get started. Yeah, any other questions or comments, and appreciating the things in the chat. Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. If you you can reach out to info@rjcavl.org. I'll put that in the chat. It's just info@rjcavl.org. If you have like a question, if you want us to look at something before you share it. But we're going to put some suggested templates for you to send out to your own lists and so forth. Yeah, and then Diana's asking about organizational plan. I'm answering all the questions here. Colleagues, if any of you want to jump in to answer any of these things, please do. I don't mean to
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything. I was going to completely allow you to answer all the questions.
Yeah.
So let's see, what's the next question on this list?
I think Diana asked a question about, is there a path or option for organizational pledges?
Organization. So we haven't thought that out yet. Right now, we're at the individual, community member level, but I definitely would say we may be looking for that. Right now, with this pledge, is a conversation starter for one. It's organizing us and showing our collective force and showing the support behind the commission members. And we may look to do an organizational pledge in the same form and fashion. Let me see, next question.
The next one, I think Cheryl asked, what's that?
The time when the recommendations will be finalized?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so different recommendations are taking different amounts of time. Right now, they're doing the immediate recommendations. Some of them are finalized, but I don't think they went through the formal process that they may need to go through to be officially submitted. If anybody else on call has any more information about that as well, but I've been wondering as far as due dates as well, and it's when they can get them done. Some of them, the recommendations are being held up because they're waiting on data still. So that's been, one of the roadblocks to getting the recommendations passed on time. How can you pass on a recommendation if you don't really have all the details to the problem at hand?
Yeah, I'll just add to what Rob said that there's a big backlog in the requests the commission has made for the city and county to give them, data on these harms. And so, and the whole thing, I think, is a little murky in terms of the timetable, which is part of why we're coming forward with this now. We really want to start, we don't want to wait until there's more clarity to start having these conversations, because we need to build up the people who are paying attention. But as soon as we know more about the timetable, we'll certainly share it with you all. Rob, there's a question about the stakeholder authority.
Yeah, I see that. So I'm also one of the initial founding members of the Reparations Stakeholder Authority Association of the Authority of Asheville, which is, you know, how earlier in the presentation, Ms. Greenlee at the Health and Wellness IFA was speaking, and she had spoken, said that the county and the city's resolution may not have the ability to do things like direct cash payments or positive race discrimination in general, which, you know, I believe that it's possible. They just have to go through a whole lot of legal BS to get to that part. But this is a way that the community can control their own resources and allocate funding. It has just been created, very, very new. So it's, we call ourselves the design team. The design team consisted of me, Thais Ruffin, Marsha Davis, Libby Cowles, and Keith Young. And it's modeled after the Reparations Stakeholder Authority of Evanston, where it is a reparations finance authority, which in the future, when we pass federal reparations, will also have the ability to be controlled by Black communities members and disperse direct cash payments then as well too. I would also say that, you know, with the RSAA, because it's still in its infancy phase and the people have to come in to create it, only thing that's been done right now is building the skeleton, collecting members and resources in the form of, you know, funding, doing fundraising. We have we have one director and a consultant. We have Tor White, who is the daughter of our well-known artist Jenny Pickens, and we have Salah Manaya. I can't remember her last name, sorry. And we have them two managing the process, but it is a complementary entity of the city's CRC. It is not to be looked at as an opposition. It is not to be looked at as it's trying to derail any authority or power from those commission members, but it's created to do things that we know that the government may be hesitant to do, such as positive race discrimination.
And Rob, the question specifically asked about the relationship between the RSAA and RJC. And am I correct in saying, like, there's no formal relationship, although we very much are, I mean, you're obviously involved in both.
I'll speak to that. So what that is, like, I am a Black community member above all else. I don't care, you know, what else I may be. I'm still Black and a community member. And we created this outside of organizations. We don't want any organizations to control it. We want the actual people. It's a members-based organization, so it's structured and set up in a democratic form to where, let's say, you have money that ends up structured in an endowment, and you have compound interest that is created each year. The people, the members, the Black people can then, through a democratic process, decide how they would like the funding to be allocated to themselves, whether I guess it could possibly be direct cash payments. It also could be something like guaranteed annual income for single Black mothers. It could also be something completely different than what I can think of. Like, I have no idea what's going to happen, but it gives us the option to be a lot more flexible. And again, like I'm saying, with the RJC has no ownership. The RJC is not a quote unquote partner, but the RJC is in reparations movement work. And it is another piece in the reparations ecosystem here in Asheville, North Carolina. And so, you know, our goal is to move reparations work forward, whether it's supporting the commission, whether it's supporting the RSAA or any other thing that is about advancing reparations in Asheville or the nation.
And I'll just, Rob, you summed it up beautifully, and I'll just tell folks that you'll be hearing more about RSAA, you know, in general, but from us too, because we do think it's a really important piece in the reparations puzzle. Our focus right now is on building up support for the CRC, just because that's, even though we don't have a timetable, we know that's going to be coming pretty soon. And so we want to make sure that we're giving that process as much support as we can. And the, you know, in terms of the RSAA process, it's building, and we'll be keeping you informed on that as well. I see a bunch of questions that have to do with whether you can sign the pledge if you don't live in Buncombe County. Yes, absolutely. You know, and some people are saying, like, you know, they visit Asheville, they shop here. They, you know, to me, if you pay sales taxes in Welcome County because you visit here, then you are a taxpayer in this region. You should have a voice. And likewise, if you're other parts of the country, I think it shows that there's support not just in this area, but beyond this area. So feel free to share it with anybody. It's open to all. I also see a comment here from Banta about having organizational. Having that community support shown through organizational pledges. We 100% agree. That's coming soon, y'all. And toolkits for how you can bring this to your organization, how you can bring this to your place of worship or any place where you are. We're working on that stuff. We just didn't want to hold back on sharing the pledge with you and getting you to sign it and share it immediately. But we will build. We're going to start figuring out some ways that you can share it in your other organizations that you're a part of too. Let's see what else we got.
I can go next. So there was also one in here about the Whitmire case and then APD. Would love to discuss all those things, but we're at time where we're at 6 o'clock and we're honoring people's times, and we knew that we'd only be able to go over the campaign. I will say that I personally was in the courtroom today at the bond hearing for Mr. Whitmire. I also got kicked out for using my phone and not being willing to give it to the officer. But I was there, and I feel like his lawyer is doing a great job of explaining the narrative of what happened to him as far as the implicit bias, how he told them he had a weapon and there was no de-escalation. They pretty much pounced him. Like 5 or 6 officers immediately started physically accosting Mr. Whitmire. And there were several other things in there that were completely against protocol and policy, especially the de-escalation training. Regardless of what this individual's previous history was, regardless of how he looked at the time or any of those things, those officers were completely outside of the regulations of their own training. How this is going to end up, not sure. Like I said, just a bond hearing today where Saturday we had met and we had rallied individuals to show up at the bond hearing. His lawyer also says a good idea to have many people there to show support and show that there's an eye on it. As far as the police budget, no, we have not planned to speak about it. And that's a deeper conversation. Whereas, as an organization, we just came out of strategic planning and we only have a certain amount of capacity, and we are putting full capacity behind reparations, but still trying to do our best in the police accountability realm as well. But we look at reparations as more potentially more effective, whereas it also affects criminal justice. My own personal understanding, I feel like a lot of Black people are locked up for crimes committed out of quality of life and a lot of other social determinants of health. And I think if we address a lot of the root causes, we'll see a decrease in criminalization of Black people as well. Reforms are kind of like Band-Aids to me. That's just my own personal perspective, not an organizational perspective. But we feel as if it's very important to focus on reparations, whereas, it has the most political social capital behind it. And we have this moment in time to address multiple systems at one time that we have not ever had in history. Let's see.
So, Rob, colleagues, I'm going to suggest, since we're a few minutes over, that we sort of officially sort of call this over and thank everybody for being here. And I'm willing to stay on a few extra minutes if people have other questions that we haven't gotten to yet. I can linger. I don't know about the rest of my colleagues, but I don't want to make other people have to stay into the dinner hour when we told you it would be an hour long. So thank you all for being here. Please check out the page. You can email us at info@rjcavl.org with any questions or comments or thoughts you have. And we will be following up with how organizations can support, toolkits for organizational conversations, and other good stuff coming soon. Thanks for being here, y'all. And if you want to stay on for a few more minutes because you got a question that wasn't answered, feel free.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.